Hi, and welcome back to the WHVP podcast. In this week's podcast, the WHVP team will sit down and discuss the Bretton Woods monetary system, the history behind it, some of the advantages and disadvantages it had on the world's economy, and how it led to where we are today in the financial world. Before we get into that topic, we'll discuss quickly the 30-year jubileum celebration of WHVP. Let's get into it. So how was your guys' vacation?
It was very nice.
It was great. We had great weather. It was not always like forecasted this way, but at the day itself it was mostly clear, sunny, so beautiful for going hiking in the mountains.
I think that it wasn't that hot was great for some outdoor activities, but it's still warm enough to lie by the pool some days.
Cool.
So it's nice.
Yeah, that's nice. And coming back, excited for the party day tomorrow?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we are very excited.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's really cool. For our listeners, we have combined our 30-year anniversary with the retirement party for Robert, and we will be celebrating that with our business partner here in Switzerland. Unfortunately, because of the travel restrictions, we cannot celebrate it with our clients as we have initially intended, but we're very happy that we can still have like a small gathering of like people in the real location, something that's not online. So very much looking forward to that. The official anniversary date is in October, so next podcast episode we'll be talking more about that, about the past 30 years of WHVP, what has happened then, some of the highlights, some of the changes, and what we're hoping for the next couple of decades.
Yes, definitely. And we have planned this event for quite some time now, and with the restrictions and coronavirus, everything was quite unsure, but now it seems to work out, and we are very happy about that.
Yeah. It's exciting. I'm excited. It'll be fun. Yeah, so today we were gonna discuss the Bretton Woods Agreement, or the Bretton Woods System that was developed in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire.
Have you ever been there?
In Bretton Woods?
Yes.
No. Have you?
No.
No. My school, my alma mater, is from New Hampshire.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But it's, I don't know, some like 100 kilometers away from Bretton Woods, so
okay.
Not quite.
Yeah.
Not quite connected, but so the Bretton Woods System, just a quick kind of definition of what it was. The world was struggling to deal with various fluctuating monetary systems. Some countries in the past, in the history, had taken their dollar off the gold standard, so they could print money just to pay for their wars or what be it, and that caused hyperinflation. A case of that is in Germany. And then after that was before World War I, but then after World War II, countries connected their currencies to the gold standard, and it was that way for quite some time. However, the Bretton Woods system was the idea of picking one global currency and pinning all the other currencies to that currency. And it was decided at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, that would be the US dollar. And countries would pin their currency. The countries in the agreement would pin their currency to the US dollar. They could fluctuate under certain circumstances, their money, but there were some pretty strict guidelines set in place to keep that from a country kind of going rogue and just printing like whatever they wanted to do. So it's an interesting system because it still was somehow connected to a gold standard, but through one currency. That was something that seemed to keep the world stable for a little bit. However, it was pretty challenging. So the history behind it was obviously in World War I, the countries like Germany, went away from the gold standard to fuel their war endeavors, and that caused hyperinflation, and it also caused the price of gold, to rise and gain value in the other currencies. Once after World War I, when the countries realized the danger of unhooking their currency to gold, everything went pretty smoothly for the next, I don't know, 10 years-ish. And then there was the Great Depression, obviously, and that caused huge problems. And traders started then trading in commodities, going, things like oil, gold, silver. That uptick really started after the Great Depression crash. So then in 1944, after the World War II, or right at the end of World War II, to figure out a stable solution to help countries recover from the recessions and the struggles they were having, came to Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and came up with this agreement to pin everything to $1, kind of this controlling currency. And it was decided to be the US dollar. And that was kind of the time when the United States essentially took over economic power of the world, because most of the major countries' currencies were pinned directly to the US dollar. At the beginning of that stage, that's to monitor the system. The IMF and the World Bank were created to be the monitoring agents of the Bretton Woods system. So that's an interesting piece of history to understand of essentially what controls the world's currency trading today, of the IMF and the fluctuations that came from the Bretton Woods system. Obviously, it's shifted its role now to looking at the free floating market. So the Bretton Woods system was essentially in place until the 1970s. So just under 30 years. When Nixon, as president, the United States had started experiencing stagflation, which is high inflation and recession at the same time. And to devalue the dollar, Nixon started to play with the value of the gold standard. And he then put a set price on gold for 1 to 38 for $1 38 ounces of gold, or 1 ounce $38 of gold. And then again quickly after moved that to 42, so 1 to 42. He did that right before he really ended the gold standard in the United States, and that led to the huge crash of 1971 in the markets, and essentially ended the Bretton Woods system as a whole. So that's kind of just the quick little synoptic history of the Bretton Woods system.
Yeah, thank you for that. If I can just build on that with some of the main advantages that come from the system. We will also talk about the disadvantages a bit later on, but I think the main advantage that we see from the system is that it gives stability and predictability. And also, of course, it has led to a lot of international cooperation, especially right after the World War that happened. This has been very beneficial in terms of countries moving closer together, reducing the risk of another war. Also with the IMF and the World Bank, institutions were created that are still working in the international financial system today. So I think what happened in the 40s back then has really shaped the way we see and experience the financial industry worldwide right now. Then other advantages that we see is that we saw economic growth during the time that the system was in place. So the US has grown quite a bit during that time. We have also seen a stable interest rates. We have had low rates of inflation. So from that perspective, there were several advantages, I would say, that the economy has experienced. And of course, and that's what I mentioned in the beginning with international cooperation, has also led to a very strong increase in international trade, and it has led to this aura of globalization that we have experienced over the past decades.
Yeah, I totally agree that the intention at the beginning was the right one, and that it helped a lot, especially the European countries, to develop out of a situation of destruction, and where they had to rebuild their economies. However, it was too strict, and the included parties, especially the USA, didn't have too much of an intention to loosen the system. So I think there was some kind of like unrest in this whole system, which began to kind of implode in the late 60s already, and then they figured out that it will not work anymore. And as you mentioned, the announcement that they ended the Bretton Woods System in 1971, it was a huge deal back then. It was everything done behind the curtains, so nobody was aware of. And then Nixon had this announcement where he said, "It's over." He mentioned it's temporary, but obviously it wasn't. So I think that there were some issues they weren't solved during the time Bretton Woods was in place.
Yeah, and I think something else that we have to look at is what happened since the system was ended until today.
Yeah.
And one topic that we just keep on talking about because it's so relevant to our business is the devaluation of the US dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that comes up on a regular basis in the conversation I have with clients and prospects is how much the US dollar has devalued since the 70s, especially if you compare it to a currency like the Swiss franc, which is typically known as this safe haven currency. So from that sense, I think I'm not, what I'm trying to say is I'm not sure like how much better the system right now is, because it also has significant drawbacks, because we just keep on seeing in the very long term the US dollar losing more and more value, but I'm not really sure how that could best be tackled in a sustainable way that still leaves enough flexibility for markets to function smoothly.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting about the Bretton Woods system and why it was even able to be put into place was because there was the gold standard. And at that point in history, the United States had 3/4 of the world's gold. They had themselves. And so all the other countries didn't even have enough gold to use the gold standard. And so it's this compilation slowly of all the gold in the United States that allowed them to be in that place of value. And again, you know, that one of the disadvantages was when they started playing with the price of gold as far as from the United States point of view of reducing the value of 1 ounce of gold to like obviously inflation by raising the price of 1 ounce of gold of what they had originally had of it caused that run where people just went to Fort Knox and were banging on the doors essentially to say, hey, I need to get rid of this paper for what actually backs this paper. And I think the ending of that system, it caused a little bit of chaos in the money markets because nothing was pinned to anything anymore. And so I think that's what you saw the following 2 decades of the world trying to figure out how do we not lose the value and to where we are now, where the IMF kind of really looks at and monitors how our country's printing, what's the M2 of each country, you know, where like is the demand for this much cash on the market, you know, because essentially now there's nothing truly backing each individual bill. And I think that was something that the Bretton Woods system we're trying to figure out how do we like tailor our dollar, how do we actually give it value. And so I think for the time, if it really was a temporary thing, there was some huge advantages, as we talked about, you know, the stabilization of growth. However, the complication was they didn't monitor it as well as they should have throughout that period.
Yeah, definitely. And I see some parallels to the current situation, as you said, Jamie, that what we are now seeing with the central banks, especially the Fed and the European Central Bank, talking about accepting high inflation rates that they used to and saying it's it's temporary. To some extent, I really doubt whether this will be the case, because the other way around, should there be a time where the inflation rate will become lower than 1.5 or even 1%, and on average you will stay with this 2%, I'm not sure whether the central banks really going to say, okay, we are accepting such a low inflation rate because on average it makes sense. On the other hand, they will say, okay, the risk of deflation is too high, and that would harm our economies, so we have to change again and going back to this 2% target. So that's a risk I see, which is in place. We will see whether it happens or not, but I think that's a possibility.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's also, you know, where we are today from the Bretton Woods agreement and system is, as you mentioned, you know, the Fed and the European Central Bank, they always set that target inflation rate. What's that target inflation rate? Well, everyone in the free market wants to grow. To grow, money has to be exchanging hands. And so keeping money at a target inflation rate allows people to think, oh, I need to spend my money now.
Yeah.
You know, if deflation, you know, that causes people to save, it causes even more problems if there's really too much money on the market. And I think that's a really challenging issue that we're facing right now with the M2 printing scales from 2020. I mean, it's unreal to see how much money is really being printed by all the central banks. I mean, it's there's not one that's not doing it that I'm aware of that's not really reducing the printing of their money significantly. And so understanding that inflation is actually something that central banks are trying to cause, but not let get out of control. It's like having a fire, you know, can you contain that fire inside the fire pit? If so, great, it provides warmth, it provides a great service. That's, you know, that's the greatest thing that mankind found out how to do is control fire. And so essentially that's kind of, for me, how I look at it is, how are they controlling that fire? Is it controlled?
Yeah. And you mentioning the M2 money size is also very interesting, because back in 2008, 2009, after the financial crisis, central banks already started to print huge amounts of money. But the interesting thing there to see is that while doing that, they also increased the requirements for the capital for the retail banks. So the money didn't really make it to the people. And now we are seeing an environment where money was sent directly to the people to spend, and that is, in my perspective, another situation than we have seen back in 2009, 2010. So it will be really interesting whether, as you said, the central banks are able to control this kind of inflationary development.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something that the Bretton Woods system kind of acted like, was a fireplace, and essentially why you were able to see that sustained growth, because the money printing, coming back to the money printing, countries weren't allowed to just print as much money as they wanted.
Yeah.
You know, they had to really control based off of, you know, what the US dollar price was on gold, and the US also had something to limit them, and now we don't have that anymore. And so I think you know, the Bretton Woods system is less unfavorable if it's truly seen as something that's temporary. But as we all know, temporary things are not usually very temporary when they're put into place. Thanks again for joining us in our conversation this episode. If you would like to learn more about WHVP and what we do, check us out at whvp.ch. Or if you want to find us at any of our social media handles at Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, or YouTube, just search WHVP. Have a great rest of your week.